He trained his wife and daughter who both hold the world record for 2-pound striped bass. So without further ado, thank you very much, Mike. We appreciate you being here tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we'll talk about, catching striped bass. I've certainly had a lot of experience with that. I started when I was 8 years old, fishing with a neighbor off the Rockaway jetties. I didn't have any luck, but he did. His name was Derek, and I certainly was enamored with this striped bass as a species, and it's been a pursuit and a goal of mine ever since. So I started initially off the shore, fishing up by the Bayville Bridge and other areas that I could access. I didn't have a boat. I was, at that time like 15, 16, 17 years old, maybe into the 18-year-old range. But after, when I was, like 18, a friend of mine that I grew up with and I purchased our first boat. It was a 18-foot Wood Thompson, for those who might know that boat. And that started my boating aspect of pursuing fish, and in particular striped bass. So let's talk about catching striped bass here off the South Shore, and specifically off Jones Inlet. As you all know, Jones has been blessed with this enormous run of bunker. The bunkers run has been like something I've never seen in my lifetime. And I am now in my 70s, so that's a long time. Initially, I used to fish for striped bass here back in the 70s into the 80s, early 80s. That was largely a trolling fishery, but it's evolved to this live line fishery, which is much more in my wheelhouse. I prefer to catch fish live lining. So, when would you do it? Obviously, the season will open on April the 15th, so you're not going to be doing this presumably before then, unless you want to do some preemptive strikes, catch and release. The other thing to keep in mind once the season opens is now we have a pretty restrictive slot limit in all of New York. So it's 28 to 31 inches. That's really not a very big fish. At the high end, 31 inches may be 16 pounds is my guess, roughly. And at the low end, maybe just barely a keeper. But nevertheless, we'll be out there fishing for these fish, and there's a few things that I would like you to keep in mind. Number one, how do you catch the bait? And where to go. So where to go, I would basically keep my eyes and ears open. You want to go, obviously, where the bunker are, where the bait is. You'll be able to get intel from club members. Barbara Solomon is running a website, Jones Inlet, fishing reports. It's a great source of information for those fishing out of Jones Inlet. One thing I noticed with the people, most people, and including myself, when I initially started to try to catch live bunker, I would tend to tire myself out. Why? Because I throw I would throw a treble hook out and immediately start to jig it, trying to snag a bunker, whether they were in sight or not. Here the schools are so thick, that technique still tends to work. But what I discovered was that you're a lot better off throwing the bait out and then basically waiting. So you throw it out, you put it in gear, and you wait, just like this, with the slack out of the water. What are you waiting for? Well, you're waiting for these bunker tails to start hitting your line. You're going to feel little ticks on the line. If you don't feel ticks, sweeping the rod trying to catch a bunker is a waste of time. So throw it out, wait a little while, wait for the ticks, and then when you feel them, usually one sweep of the rod, wham, you're in. You got a bunker. Now, the question is getting it into the boat. The other thing that I wanted to point out that I do differently than a lot of people is you'll notice this treble hook is not weighted. So I do not believe in using weighted treble hooks to catch bunker, particularly when there's a gazillion of them on the surface. Why would you want to sink your treble hook down? You want to be in the strike zone as long as possible. The way you're going to do that, this treble hook is more than heavy enough to be able to cast out a considerable distance, certainly more than anything that you'll be comfortable with in order to catch your bunker. So other people will start to add more treble hooks here. Usually one, the bunker is so thick here on the South Shore that I think one is plenty. So that is basically what I'll do. The next thing I'll do is when I hook up, this is where I'll differ with a lot of people currently on the South Shore, is I'll immediately pull that bunker into the boat and stick them in my live well. I have a very big live well on the Blue Jacket. It's a 26-40-year. I have a 44-gallon live well with a pump that's circulating 29 gallons a minute. That's a lot of capacity. I don't think it actually puts out that much, but that's the rated capacity. So I can carry 30 live bunker, no problem, and keep them all alive for the entire day. You don't need that many to go out and catch striped bass over here these days. I think that certainly like a dozen is more than enough to go out and get them. I've been hearing, basically the technique here is use a weighted treble, snag the bunker, and basically then leave it in place. Let it drift down. Very effective. You're going to catch a lot of bass. But, particularly with this slot limit, I think you're going to kill a lot of bass. There's no need to do that. There is another option, and I'm about to present that to you. So this is my other option. This is my go-to bass rod. I developed this I didn't develop this. Actually, I mugged this from Jimmy Krug, another club member, who turned me on to this. Basically, the Freeport Tuna Club used to give out these rods back in the day for annual awards. This is a fiberglass CL rod. It's very flexible, very limber. To this, I have attached a 10-0 owner circle hook. By most standards for striped bass fishing, this is huge. There's a 100-pound jink eye leader. By most standards for striped bass, that's like ridiculous. But it doesn't seem to matter to striped bass. They don't seem to care. So I'll pull the bunker in and hook that bunker through the nose by putting it through the lower jaw and out the nose. You can see the side of that hook. I have a few here if you want to pass them around. Or I'll hook them right in the back, depending upon whether the fish wants to cooperate and swim away from the boat. If he doesn't want to swim away, I'll hook him in the back. Maybe that'll help. Otherwise, I may hook him down by the vent on the bottom. I do that rarely. Usually it's not necessary. These hooks, by the way, are designed or marketed by owner for marlin fishing. live bait marlin fishing. They're extremely strong. You'll never break them. I was having a problem with Gamakatsu hooks. I kept straightening them, bending them, losing fish. I went to the owner. Basically, here's why. Prior to using this hook, my batting average was about 250. That was way too low for me. I was working very hard to get a bite. And when only 25% of the fish you get a bite on, you're hooking up, that is not very good. With this hook, I'm batting 900. Huge difference. This is the only hook I'll use. So here on the South Shore, I'm using the same technique I'd use in Montauk. The only difference is the bait and how much weight I'm going to put here. So in Montauk, I'm drifting along at 4 knots through the current, through the rips. In order to be able to do that, you got to use like a 4-ounce weight, maybe 5, maybe 6, maybe 8, in order to keep it down. Depends on the moon tide. This same hook, same setup, 9 feet, will be hooked up to, in Montauk, a porgy. Here off the South Shore, it'll be hooked up to a bunker. The weight here off the South Shore may be none. I'll just let the bunker swim out on top, maybe 2 ounces, because the drift is very, very slow. So you really don't need a lot of weight. I just want to get the fish down, the bunker down toward the bottom. That's my belief is that as many bass as you might see on top, the vast majority of the school is going to be on the bottom, particularly the bigger fish. So that's what I'm looking to do. In Montauk, I fish this rod in gear, in the rod holder, and I will just look for the bite. The bite could be very subtle, like that, or completely non-subtle, meaning it'll bend from this butt and be parallel to the water like this. And the fish is hooked. You don't need to do anything but reel them in. Here on the South Shore, I changed my technique a little bit. Same rig, same leader, but I put the click on. I left the rod in free spool. Still in the rod holder. Still in the rod holder. If you get a bite, it's pretty obvious. The click starts going. What do you do? Yeah, pretty much. Let it run. If it's running quick, if the clicks are going quickly, you know the fish has got the bait. I wouldn't let it go too long, if at all. So I'll throw it in gear, and I'll start to take the slack out of the line. I want to load this up. So I want to see the rod start to bend. Generally, when it gets to here, the fish realizes there's a problem, and it wants to take off. At that point, they usually hook themselves, and all you got to do is reel it in. Last year, I guess it was last year, New York State changed their slot limit. I had been tagging striped bass for, I don't know, 20 years. Over the course of time, between striped bass and fluke, I've tagged over 20,000 fish. Now, excuse me, 2,000 fish. That's a big change. 2,000 fish. Last year, I didn't tag any. So on the striped bass front, I didn't tag them because It's like I lost interest. So I really didn't striped bass fish last year. I came back in the fall here, and I did go out one day. We got some bass. All were released. I released the fish in the water. I use this tool. If you're using circle hooks, this tool is like awesome. I wish I could tell you where to buy it. I used to buy it in Cabela's. They don't seem to have it anymore. So I would just reach down, grab the leader, grab the hook, pop, done. I wouldn't bring the fish in the boat. I don't encourage you to bring the fish in the boat. But if you're going to do it early in the season. I found that by July 15th, it's just too warm to bring a big bass into the boat. They're going to die. So I don't do that. If you want to release the fish, you want it to live. Everybody likes the photo shots. I like the photo shots. So, try to get them early in the year, or get them, stick your head down by the water, take the photo shot in the water, or do something. But bringing them in the boat, not a good idea. How do I hook them? I mentioned I'll usually hook the bunker through the nose, sometimes through the back. This obviously is not the size of the bait I'm using, much smaller, but for illustration purposes, that's what I brought. I will, if I'm not using bunker, I'm using eels. Eels work during the daytime, believe it or not, particularly in Montauk, all season long. I know back here, I only fish eels at night. I do use the Gamakatsu for the eels. I think, I don't have my glasses on, but I think this says 8.0. Still a fairly big hook. Those owner hooks are just way too heavy for an eel, and it won't be able to swim naturally. So that's why I scale it back. And that's it. That's about it. For catching striped bass on live bait, it's actually quite easy. Though, if you ask me, when I was 8 years old, how easy it was, I would have said, not easy at all. Questions?
Mike, the 10-0 hook, are you still using it? Is that only for live lining?
I only use that for live lining.
What do you use it for cut bait or
For-
clam?
Well, cut bait comes in two varieties. One is a dead bunker, and you'll cut it up. I did a whole talk last year about bunker chunking. I will use like an 8.0 on bunker chunking, and I tend not to go much lower than that. One thing I want to point out. The mouth on a striped bass, even a small one, opens up about that big, right? So that hook I'm showing you doesn't even begin to fill that void. And when you lock up on that fish and you're trying to hook them, you want to make sure, this is the most important thing, that there's plenty of gap between the bait that you're using and the shank of the hook, right? I realized that a lot of these baits I'm using, 5.0 hook, basically there's nothing left to grab the to grab the lip of the fish. So I went to the bigger hook, and my hookup ratios shot way up. There was a guy who came from the North Shore and talked to the club here quite a few years ago. I'm sure some of you may recall this guy. He was a charter boat captain fishing up by like Throg's Neck. And he brought this treble hook that he was using to fish for striped bass that just shocked me. The thing was like 5 times the size of this thing. It was huge. But he was having no problem hooking up bass. And when he hooked them up, he didn't gut hook them because the hook was too big for them to swallow, but not too big to fit in the mouth. Other questions? Gene?
Isn't snagging a bunker with a treble hook and leaving it out there to catch a bass illegal? That's what I heard. They could give you a summons for that.
It's illegal to fish for striped bass with anything but a circle hook. Questions?
Mike, I have a question. You had mentioned a little bit that the fishery, the local fishery at Freeport seemed to be picking up last couple of years. Do you have any thoughts why that is? I know like in years past it seemed the fall run in Montauk was like legendary, and now last 2 seasons it's been legendary here. Do you have any thoughts what's bringing the fishery?
Well, I certainly have thoughts of what's bringing the fishery here, and it's this. It was finally the states of New York and New Jersey deciding to more strictly monitor the catch of the reduction boats. Reduction boats are those that are fishing purse seining for bunker.
The trawlers, the big trawlers offshore?
They're not actually trawlers. They're called reduction boats. They use these big circular nets, and they were coming in to, they use spotter planes, identify the schools of bunker, and then they would just encircle them. And a lot of their, the reason why they're doing this is a lot of these bunker are used for dietary supplemental products, fish oils, pellets, or pills, and things that humans take, as well as, I guess, some other scientific products, and then finally maybe fertilizers. But New York State and New Jersey put severe restrictions on how much they were allowed to take, and that resulted in a explosion of bait here in the New York Bight, like I've never seen in my life. And that is really the reason why things like tuna and now cobia and striped bass have all come back here to the New York Bight. Out in Montauk, that's a whole different story. I think actually the proliferation of the bait is negatively affecting Montauk because, fish aren't as quick to leave the bait to come east out to Montauk. Montauk has turned into a spring fishery. I know you all, for years I always thought of Montauk as the fabled fall fishery. That fabled fall fishery is virtually gone. Nobody really knows where those fish are going, but they're sure not coming past Montauk. There's a lot of fish out there, but they're smaller. They're not that huge, cows. Those, if you want to get them before July 15th, if not July 4th now. From the June full moon through July 15th, that's the time you want to fish Montauk for those big fish. But you can't keep them anyway, so decide what to do. Other questions? Nick?
Mike, any reason why you hold your rods? You have only mono. You don't use no.
Oh, good question. So, when I first started fishing, I'm happy to say it was after linen. but all we had was mono. And then along came braid. And braid was like outrageous, right? Because you could feel everything. You put it on your, the first time I used braid, I was fluke fishing in the spot I told you, right off Shinnecock, and I could feel every sand wave. It's like I'm saying to my friends, this is unbelievable. You got to try this rod. I can't believe what I'm feeling. I never felt this in my life before. Very sensitive. Great, great bottom fishing tool. This is what I use for fluke fishing and for black fishing and other bottom species. But for all of the reasons why I just described to you, why it's so great, when a bass picks up a live bait, what do you think they're feeling? They're feeling everything in reverse. So you got this graphite rod, doesn't bend. You got this braid line, doesn't give. Bass picks up that bait and says, wait a minute, something ain't right. With this wimpy rod, with this mono that stretches like a rubber band, and bends like you can't believe, right? They don't feel anything. By the time they feel it, they're mine. So that's why I use mono. This is 40-pound mono. Maybe sometimes I wish I had 50 because I've had plenty of fish I can't stop.
What models? Trilene, Andes? What do you use?
Yeah, any mono. Yeah, I use Andy, pink Andy.
Some have to stretch.
I use pink Andy.
Pink Andes?
Yeah. I'm very partial to Andy. I use Andy to set 3 world records. Pretty good stuff.
What if you're jigging for him, Mike? You're using braid then?
Okay, so I got into something called snap jigging 3 years ago. I'm using a very light spinner like this, 10-pound braid, 3/4 of an ounce jig, and I'm tying, a little leader on that, and I'm able to basically get that down in the Montauk Rips, 65 feet down, when the boat's shifting at 4 knots. So, and then basically once it reaches bottom, just snapping it up like that. And maybe you get 3 snaps out of it, then you got to reacquire the bottom. Very effective. I did it here in the fall. Works here, very effective technique. If you haven't tried snap jigging, go on YouTube, Google it. You'll find a guy there that will tell you all about it. I highly recommend it. Other questions? Thank you all for coming. We now have Dave Pinkers.